Someone you love is going to die. You already know this. And when it happens, there will be a funeral, a burial, flowers, a gathering of people who say the right things. It will feel ancient and necessary, like something humans have always done. But the rituals you will follow are newer than you think. The grief underneath them is not. That grief is so old it predates language. And what your ancestors actually did with it would stop you cold. Here is what the archaeological record tells us. The earliest confirmed evidence of deliberate burial goes back roughly 130,000 years to a site in a cave in what is now Israel. Neanderthals, not even modern humans, were placing their dead in the ground with intention. Not dropping them, not leaving them, placing them. Researchers found the bodies arranged in specific positions, sometimes curled, as if sleeping. Around some of them, traces of pigment. Around others, animal bones that suggest objects were placed deliberately. These were not accidents. Something was happening inside the minds of these ancient people that compelled them to treat a dead body as something more than meat. Francesco D'Errico, a paleoanthropologist at the University of Bordeaux, has spent decades trying to understand what early symbolic thinking looked like in the archaeological record. What he keeps finding is that the impulse to mark death, to do something with the body, to acknowledge that a person was here, appears across multiple hominin species, across different continents, across hundreds of thousands of years. The behavior is not uniquely human. It is something older, something that emerged when a brain became complex enough to understand loss. But what exactly did they do? The answer is stranger and more varied than any modern funeral tradition prepares you for. In some of the earliest sites, bodies were not buried at all. They were kept. Archaeologists working at sites in Europe and Africa have found skulls that were carefully cleaned, defleshed, and preserved long after death. Some of these skulls show evidence of repeated handling, smooth, worn surfaces that suggest they were touched, carried, passed between people over years or even generations. The dead were not gone. They were kept present. In several cases, the skulls had been decorated with ochre, a red mineral pigment, as if coloring them was a way of maintaining something: identity, connection, presence. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, archaeologist Ralph Selecki excavated a Neanderthal burial site in the 1950s and found pollen scattered around the body in a pattern suggesting flowers had been placed there deliberately. The idea of someone 60,000 years ago carrying flowers to lay beside their dead sends a jolt of recognition across the entire distance of history. Later researchers debated whether the pollen could have arrived by other means, but the debate itself revealed something important. We want this to be true because it feels familiar. Because grief expressed through flowers is a language we still speak. In ancient China, burial sites dating back 8,000 years show bodies arranged alongside tools, food, and personal objects. In Siberia, a child buried 24,000 years ago was found covered in thousands of ivory beads, suggesting that even in the deep cold of the last ice age, humans were adorning their dead with the most precious things they had. The child's body had been carefully prepared. Someone spent hours, perhaps days, sewing those beads into a burial garment. That act of labor in the face of death is one of the most human things in the entire archaeological record. What these sites reveal, taken together, is not a single ancient death ritual. They reveal a pattern of feeling. Across every culture that left physical traces, the response to death included the same emotional core: a refusal to let go immediately, an impulse to mark the moment, a need to do something with the body that acknowledged the life that had been inside it. Paul Pettit, an archaeologist at Durham University, who has spent his career studying Paleolithic burial practices, argues that what we are looking at in these ancient sites is the birth of the concept of the dead. Not just a body, not just an absence, but a category of being, neither fully gone nor fully present, that required its own rituals, its own rules, its own ongoing relationship with the living. The moment humans began burying their dead with intention, they were also beginning to construct a world that extended beyond the visible, a world where the dead still matter. This is the counterintuitive truth that the archaeological record keeps pushing toward. The rituals were never really about the dead. They were about the living. About managing the unbearable cognitive experience of knowing that someone who was here is now gone, and that you will be gone someday too. The burial, the skull preserved and carried, the flowers, the ivory beads. These were all ways of making the incomprehensible survivable. Modern grief psychology has a name for what ancient humans were doing instinctively. Continuing bonds theory, developed by psychologists Dennis Klass, Phyllis Silverman, and Stephen Nickman in the 1990s, challenged the long-held assumption that healthy grieving meant detaching from the dead and moving on. Their research showed something more complicated and more ancient. People who maintained an ongoing inner relationship with those they had lost, talking to them, feeling their presence, keeping objects that connected them, did not grieve worse. In many cases, they grieved better. The ancient practice of keeping the skull, of carrying the dead with you, was not primitive superstition. It was sophisticated emotional regulation, arrived at by instinct, hundreds of thousands of years before the science caught up. Think about what you do when someone you love dies. You keep things. A piece of clothing that still holds a smell. A voicemail you cannot bring yourself to delete. A photograph placed where you will see it every morning. You are doing something your ancestors did with pigment and bone. The technology has changed. The impulse is identical. There is one more piece of this that most people have never heard. At several ancient burial sites, archaeologists have found evidence that the dead were mourned communally, with fire, not cremation, something different. Hearths built near burial sites, ash and bone and charred animal remains suggesting that people gathered around the body, ate together, and kept the fire burning. Grief, from its very earliest expression, was not a private act. It was a social one. The community assembled, food was shared, the fire was maintained. Being together in the face of death was not a modern cultural invention. It was the original human response. Your body knows this. When someone dies and people gather, when food appears uninvited at the door, when strangers hug in church lobbies, when the group that barely speaks finds itself sitting together in the same room, that is not tradition. That is biology expressing itself through behavior. The pull toward others in the presence of death is older than any religion, older than any culture, older than the words you use to describe what you are feeling. Someone you love is going to die. And when it happens, and you find yourself doing things that feel instinctive, keeping something of theirs, gathering with others, sitting in silence beside something that used to be a person, you will not be following a script written by your culture. You will be following one written into the human species over hundreds of thousands of years. The grief is ancient, the need to mark it is ancient, and the fact that you feel it at all, that a death means something to you, that the absence of a person leaves a shape in the world you can feel, that is perhaps the oldest thing about you.